Schussler, Director at Economists dotcoza, and Charl Kocks from Ratings Africa join us for a look at whether we should be taking rating agencies' views with a pinch of salt. So let's start there. Mike, should we be taking this with a pinch of salt? Is this a knee-jerk reaction?
I would say a little bit. I don't think fully, but I think we've just come through a situation where there was an accident on the highway, and that made everybody stop and look where there's potentially other accidents. And perhaps with the pressure that rating agencies are under, they looked a little bit too hard under the hood and determined that there is a possibility of an accident sometime in the future on this highway. And the problem is, with them predicting it, the accident becomes more of a probability. So ultimately, we're at this place where, yes, there may be problems here and there in the South African banking system, but ultimately I think we still have a very good and safe banking system, not just because WIFA and IMD and so on say that, but we have a very good, I think, overall situation where people have been able to get money to the banks. That's the one part. The other part is that the area where the damage is being done in the small loan category, unsecured lending, is still a very small category overall. And it's probably not the only category for Capitec, and Capitec is different in that it has a lot of retail clients. But the other fact is that the central bank, I think, was waiting a little bit long to step into ABLE, and there wasn't much left, and the people got hurt in the wholesale arena, which should not have been hurt because ultimately they are also retail clients to the wholesale.
Mike, can we take a step back, actually? This is a specific story here, ABLE and Capitec, but I want to take a step back and have a look at the role of the rating agency in the financial services world, because if I read from the internet, and we don't trust the internet, of course, it says here, a credit rating agency is a company that assigns credit ratings that rate a debtor's ability to pay back debt by making timely interest payments and the likelihood of a default. And then you go down a couple of paragraphs and it says, the credit rating sphere is a highly concentrated industry with the two largest CRAs, that's credit rating agencies, another acronym for you, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, controlling 80% of the global market share, etc., etc. And when you put the other one in, which is Fitch, it's 95%. So when I see that, I think monopoly or oligopoly or cartel, and therefore inefficiencies come through, and therefore maybe it's almost like an ESCOM. So when they have a look at something like Capitec, it's maybe not a true representation of what is going on.
Well, you know, I think let's take a thing, whether they are a monopoly or oligopoly or whatever, you know, how they rate things shouldn't be influenced by that. And ultimately, you know, they have been hauled over the coals overseas for not warning us beforehand. So perhaps they're also under pressure because of this situation. I also read the 95% thing, but I think that's a bit of American view, because every time I sit in Treasury visit me with the rating agencies, I see a lot more Japanese rating agencies these days, also out of London and so on. So I think the 95% part is probably true vis-a-vis the Americans, maybe even Europe, but vis-a-vis the whole world, I'm not too sure. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that should influence a rating at all. I think the rating agency is looking at the situation on the ground. I don't agree with what they did necessarily. I think I am a bit worried that there's a bit of an overblown case here, or a worrying situation. But ultimately, I think where we are right now, the rating agency wasn't acting because it was a monopoly. It was acting because they're worried that they again get caught out.
That's a downgrade on him immediately there.
Oh dear, David.
Is that still possible, though? Is that still possible?
What concerns me with the rating agencies, and we're not going to change it, because Moody's, S&P dictate the rest of the world, and they will dictate. People will, most of the large international investors will follow what they say, whether or not it's a duopoly or oligopoly, whatever it is. I think what concerns me in the Capitec situation is that they have got retail deposits, and they're the ones who get nervous and flee. And that can skew things if they start to withdraw money as a result of the hype and media that we're seeing at the moment. Have you have there been withdrawals? I haven't watched the situation. Have they mentioned that there's been any withdrawals?
I don't think I've read anything or seen anybody run away with their money from the bank at the moment, but that's always a risk, David. Ultimately, I think the problem with a rating agency is that it has this, if it makes this type of pronouncement, it can cause this sort of run, and ultimately it makes itself fulfilling. So it is a very big worry, I think, which one would have, because ultimately, you know, the type of people that are banking at a Capitec are your small guys. You put your staff salaries into it. These days it's even young graduates and everybody, because they're saving on those banking costs. People are under financial pressure. So you don't want this to happen. And they've been actually quite an innovative little bank. And they've led the way in creating a market for, let's call it, to a large extent, the unbanked.
Charl, let's maybe look at the actual impact that we're likely to see off the back of this particular downgrade. I'm also thinking of future instances where Capitec might go into the international markets to raise capital, and whether this is going to have an impact on the cost of capital. What are the real implications that are likely to happen now?
Well, logically speaking, it should be more difficult for them to get wholesale funding, in the sense that it probably is going to be less accessible and somewhat differently priced. The extent of that I can't determine today, because I have no idea, but you must understand that a bank like Capitec isn't borrowing at the kind of same rate as, say, Eskom borrows. So there's already a differential. It's not likely that that differential is going to double or triple or anything like that. But it does affect people's confidence. It does affect whether they think that somebody else looking over their shoulder is going to be happy that they've invested in Capitec debt. So there can be a result. The Capitec people can obviously go to an appeal process and say, for these and these reasons, we think that this process, this decision really, is not appropriate at the time. And we have to understand that it is a sophisticated process, this rating process. It is not somebody working on the back of a cigarette box. So there are methodologies that are spelled out. You can look them up, and specifically on the Moody's website, you can look up what they are. You also need to read the whole announcement by Moody's. You can't simply go by what is on a two-line news item. And it's clear there that they, in part, are commenting on the stance of the Reserve Bank to this, call it crisis if you don't mind me saying that, the problem with Able. And they are sending me as a reader a signal that there's something in how the Reserve Bank acted here which makes them concerned. Now remember, a ratings agency has criteria as to where it positions a rating depending on certain fundamental aspects of what's happening in the bank. It then goes to another analysis which is called financial flexibility or support, saying that this entity may be so and so strong on its own, but in a regulated environment, if something does go wrong that's a catastrophe, then somebody like the SARB could come in and support in a certain way. If I take the gentleman around here and perhaps yourself back to February 2002, the big thing that happened there on that weekend was that, and I was then still in credit ratings, by the way, just in governance right now, so I hope that I'm independent. We believed that the rules had changed for Reserve Bank intervention. So effectively, we kind of cancelled all the ratings on the Saturday afternoon. We worked right through the weekend, and in our case, CA Ratings, we had our opinions corrected or up again on Monday at 8 o'clock. Because we had to determine, in a scenario where there could be perhaps a run on the bank, where depositors could get skittish, and by the way, it's the corporate ones that get skittish far more quickly, who don't listen to the fact that it's a 5-year deposit, I want my money now. We had to take a view as to whether that would have an effect on those banks' liquidity to the extent that they would be subject to a run. So it's not a simple process. It's built on a number of methodologies.
Charl, it's not a simple process at all. I mean, a lot of people are bashing the rating agencies at the moment, almost as though they're saying, well, these people are retrospective and they're just coming out with these things that we knew about 2 months ago. But of course, it's an assiduous process to go through the books and the instruments of a company like Capitec or African Bank Investments Limited or any other company on the JSE. David Shapiro, just having a look at what's happened today, do you think that this is the sort of thing that scuppers the aspirations, in the short to medium term anyway, of a company, a bank like Capitec, which wants to get into mortgage lending and become the 5th of the 4 already banks we have in South Africa that are so-called mainstream?
You know, the problem is, and I'm going to ask Charl, because there was a concern with the Reserve Bank, and I'm not quite sure what it was. I haven't read the full statement, but Lindsay, it is a worry. You know, what concerns me is it hasn't got the muscle power of a Nedbank, or, you know, the depth of a Standard Bank, or the depth of a First Rand. Relatively speaking, it is not a huge, you know, it's not a huge bank, and any kind of mishap like this can make it wobble. At one stage, African Bank was significantly bigger than than Capitec. Things might have turned around now, but that's my concern, is that it can cause these kind of withdrawals or run on the bank and then make the model teeter. But I think we need to understand why why the downgrade came and what the Reserve Bank, what the worry about the Reserve Bank was.
A final addition to that, Charl, before we go to break?
I think that if the Reserve Bank decides to adapt its rules, the signals that it sends out to the market, it needs to be clear as to whether it's a specific reason for that and whether it's something that's going to take place for the future. In 2002, the rules were solvent and profitable, then we'll support. Sambo, at that stage, in my view, was both. It wasn't supported. And there's a story for another day about that. But that caused major jitters in the market. And luckily, we didn't have the major run across all the banks. Luckily, when we spoke to them about BOE, they acted, I think overreacted a little bit, guarantee and all, but they acted smartly and it never happened. So at the end of the day, we have something that the Reserve Bank could work at in helping also the ratings agencies be clear on what the rules of the game are.